Welcome to the Genealogy Happy Hour, a place where new family historians can learn to document their family histories and celebrate their new discoveries. I'm Amy.
And I'm Penny, and we're here to help you discover your family tree from the beginning.
Welcome to episode 88. In this episode, we are going to talk about properly documenting kinships.
Which is so important, even though that's not the most glamorous.
It is not, but it's super important.
Super important.
And I'm sure that you will give this episode a much snazzier title.
We'll try.
That's what we're going to be talking about today because it's super important. For over 12 years now, I've been involved in reviewing Lineage Society papers and Pioneer Certification Program applications, and numerous applicants don't have the correct documentation or enough documentation to prove those relationships, those kinship relationships, parent to child.
Yeah, I bet you have some stories to tell.
Well, I got one the other day, and I'm like, how are you related to this person? I'm like, oh no, it's the father of my last patriot that I put in for the Revolutionary War. And I'm like, but this person was born 10 years after the person you're saying is their child. So how can that be? But they found it on I don't know, an online tree. I don't know,
Yeah.
So we need to make sure, as new genealogists, that we are properly documenting all of these individuals in our family, and that we are making sure that we do have the best genealogical evidence. We analyze it for corroboration of the data, and we make sure that we're able to explain any discrepancies that we find in the data.
Right.
So how do we do that?
I don't know, but we have to talk about wine first.
Oh, we have to talk about wine first?
You jumped right in.
I forgot. All right.
How could you?
Do you have wine, Penny?
I do have a wine.
This is so important.
We're
I just really need to talk about it right now.
I see that. But I'm going to talk about wine because that's important to me. The wine today is also from Italy, as was our last one in our last episode, but I'm going back to white.
Okay.
That's my preferred. And this one is San Giuseppe Pinot Grigio. And it has, I've searched for a good description of this wine. I like it. Mm-hmm. You like it.
I do like it.
We've been drinking it here.
Yes. So what's the description?
The description is floral aroma, and it's a dry. Mm-hmm. It's a dry. It's good. Pair it with a spicy Asian or plain chicken salad.
Plain chicken salad.
Either a spicy Asian
or plain chicken salad. That's
yeah. Okay. Probably one of the worst descriptions I've read.
That's terrible.
But I do like this wine, and I would buy it again.
Absolutely,
100%.
100%. So we need to come up with a better description.
Somebody does somewhere. That one is not good.
All right.
The sponsor of today's episode of Genealogy Happy Hour is newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. Newspapers.com is your ultimate resource for discovering your family's history. Explore more than 800 million newspaper pages in their vast collection spanning 3 centuries. Newspapers.com is your gateway to exploring the past, with papers from the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond.
Trace your family's journey and uncover the extraordinary tales of your ancestors through newspaper stories, birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, and much more. For listeners of today's show, newspapers.com is extending a discount of 20% off on a Publisher Extra subscription. Just use the code HAPPYHOUR at checkout. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to prove kinships.
How do we do it, Amy?
You know how we do this.
Well, I do know one thing is when you have a document,
yes,
you really need to spend some time with it.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's very easy to look at a document and go, oh, names, parents' names, there's the date. And then off you go running, and there could be a lot in there. And we've talked about this in other ones, to really dissect a document before you tear off.
And don't assume, don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions. Well, Elizabeth Shown Mills, in her book Evidence Explained, on page 24 and 25, she kind of goes over the first step in analyzing the documents or the data that you're getting. And obviously, original sources, usually I should say, not always, but usually original sources, that is material that is in its first oral or written form, with primary information, which would be details provided by someone with first-hand knowledge of the event or the information on the record. And that it has direct evidence. It has information that seems to directly answer the research question. So a birth certificate, for example, would be, it's an original government document that was created by the doctor or the midwife who witnessed the event, with information provided, usually by the mother, that directly answers the question of date of birth, place of birth, and parents' names. So, and when I say original document, original source, that document can be a photocopy of the original document. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the actual original in your hands, but at least a photocopy of that. But not every document or piece of information is seemingly as clear-cut as the birth certificate. And in fact, even birth certificates can be deceptive, as DNA is now proving.
It's so true.
But that's for a whole nother podcast. We're going to go with what we got on the paper.
Yeah. Yes.
So, but most often family researchers are using multiple documents with both original and derivative sources that contain primary and or secondary information, and that can contain both direct and indirect evidence. So, we've got to analyze all of that as we're even looking in one document for what, and then how long since the event was that document created. I was looking at my mother's birth certificate, and hers was recorded, I think, maybe 2 months after she was born. So to me, that it does not say on the birth certificate, but she was most likely born at home, because it took a while for that birth to be recorded. Sometimes we have births that are not recorded until many, many years after the fact.
A delayed birth certificate.
Correct.
I've got one of those in my family.
Right. So we need to look.
I'll tell you the plus on that one, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before because I just think it's such a cool fact, is when that one came out, the mother is still living and provided her actual name, which is Wealthy Susan Chandler Stevens' kid, rather than just Susan, which probably would have been on the original birth certificate if that was there. So, and that corroborated her birth certificate with the W.S. Chandler for that date.
So there you go. Exactly right. So again, we're using multiple documents to make sure that we do have the right person, and that all the information is matching. My father's birth certificate, I was just looking at that one today, and there's a piece of information there that I don't know where it came from. It seems wrong. I mean, my father's a twin, so he was the second twin born, but he had he had a twin sister, and then he had an older sister, but yet it says he's the fourth child born, with 4 children still living, and his twin sister says the third, with 3 still living. I know. But when I go to their older sister's birth certificate, it's the first child. So I don't know if the doctor got confused. There's no other birth certificates. There's nothing. It's a mystery.
Well, my grandfather was on his birth certificate as a completely different name than what is his name.
Right.
And we have an affidavit attached to it. That changed it. Said this was not the name we gave our child.
I've run into that too. And it's causing quite a bit of consternation in Germany over a person who was born in Chicago. And they went by a completely different name. And but it's clearly the same person.
Yeah.
You know, there were not two people. Yeah. So yes,
But if you're researching that, if somebody else was researching my grandfather, they're not going to find his birth certificate because it's a different name.
It's a completely different name, right?
Only if you know you've got that affidavit that says that they're swearing that this is not his name and this is his name and yada yada yada.
But that affidavit, you should be able to find that affidavit in the courthouse.
Yeah, in the courthouse.
And we'll get to We'll get to that. Well, if we don't have an original source, we don't have primary information, we don't have direct evidence, sometimes we have a derivative source, which means it's material that's produced by copying an original or manipulating its content. So, for instance, a lot of times we will see when we're searching online an index or a transcript, which is a transcript of the information that's held by the Vital Records Department. Secondary information is details provided by someone with secondhand or more distant information. So, for instance, information that we would get in an obituary. We don't know who sent that information in. Clearly, it wasn't the decedent, but any information about their birth, their parents, we don't know where that information came from. So another would be, a grandchild's recollection. Your grandparent is writing down about their grandparents. That's after the fact. They're only being possibly remembering what they were told by their parents. So that's secondary information. And then indirect evidence is information that doesn't directly address the research question. So let's say a death index stating that the approximate year of birth was, based on the age at death. So that's indirect evidence of about the time that they were born, or where they were born. Or an obituary stating how old they were at the time of death. But most data that we find is a combination. The classic example is the death certificate, right, where you've got both primary information and secondary information.
Who's the doctor who's giving that information, and then whoever is the informant, and on the bottom.
Correct. And then the primary information would be for the death, but the secondary information is for the birth, because the people who are, unless there are some instances where you have a parent giving information about a child's death. But other than that, it's usually a spouse or a child giving information about their parent on the death certificate. They weren't there for the birth. They're only, they're just saying, recording what they've been told.
What they've known. Right.
Many times you'll have a spouse who is giving the parents information, and they're actually giving perhaps a step-parent because that's the only person that they've known as the parent. And that can be very misleading.
Absolutely.
So it's a great exercise to go through your documents, make sure that you have enough documentation, and that there are no conflicts within that documentation. So don't stop at just the birth certificate, let's say, or if you've been researching online, do you actually have the document, or are you just using an index? If you're just using an index, are you able to get a copy, or at least a genealogical copy?
And how many documents, if you are using indirect, do you think is a good number to make sure you've got the right date or whatever information is that
according
you're doing?
If we're doing good genealogical research, we're supposed to be doing exhaustive research. So that means birth certificate, marriage record, death certificate, obituary, censuses, probate, Bible records, SS5 if they died after 1936. So how many is that?
That's quite a bit.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
And this is just to prove birth parents.
Okay.
Birth parents.
Yeah.
So
get everything you can. Correct.
Yeah. Marriage record. Because again, those birth certificates, they can have mistakes. Like you said, you had a family member whose the name is completely wrong, or parent's name is messed up. I've seen one where they had the wrong gender on the birth certificate. And the wrong name. It's like the father was like expecting it to be a boy, the baby to be a boy, and it wasn't, and they just kind of rolled with it.
Wow.
So it causes a lot of chronic problems.
That would be a problem. For sure.
So let's say, and of course we all know that at some point, not too distantly in the past, birth certificates were not even a thing. They didn't really even come into existence and were unified throughout the United States as being required until the 1920s. So, that's only 100 years ago. Prior to that, it's going to be sporadic.
That's it.
And usually at the county level if it's available. You people who are researching in New England, y'all are lucky because you've got little towns who have birth records going back. Great records going back centuries.
Yeah. The rest of us?
But us down the South and, in the Midwest, in the wilderness. Correct. But marriage records are great. Going back into the 19th century, because, again, you're always going to be able to... You should almost always be able to find a marriage record. Obviously, when you get out on the planes, sometimes those were not filed. But it's the marriages that's all about property transfer, and so those things are going to be recorded someplace or
I like
another.
the ones that have the extra information, like
Correct.
the parents or
Yes.
like birthdays or something.
Right.
Something other than the ones that just drive me batty or
Just a certificate.
this is the guy's name, this is the girl's name, sign with an X.
Yeah.
Done.
Right. I know.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I can't even prove that's actually the couple I'm
Correct.
looking for.
Yep. Exactly right. Exactly right. You've got to have other information later on, and it doesn't have parents' names on it. But some of them are wonderful. You really need to be looking for the marriage license or application. Sometimes those are in two different formats. They're two different. Down here, for instance, in Florida, the applications are kept in a different location. They're separate from the certificate. Application can be filed, or applied for, filled out, but then never brought back. The return was never returned, so the marriage is never recorded as being ever being performed. So those licenses or applications are, like you said, have all the wonderful genealogical information, parents' names and all that. So those are what we need to be looking for. Death certificates, again, do you have an index or do you have the actual document? If you have the index, go get the actual document. Because, and don't ask for just the transcribed one. Many times when you send off, especially if you do the online stuff, you'll just get a printed computer transcript of the information that's on file. But what you want is the actual photocopy of what was filed, because there can be two different things there. Like I was saying, if I had just had my dad's birth certificate, it doesn't, or my birth certificate doesn't say if I'm the first or the third child, and I wouldn't know that there's a conflict there if I hadn't got the actual physical print photocopy of it. So there can be a lot of information there that you're missing out if you don't get it.
I feel like I need to go back through some of these birth certificates I've got just to see for fun, like what is on there that maybe I missed.
For example, if you order one from Ohio, it will just come and it will say this person was born in Ohio, this is their certificate number, the date of birth, their name, their parents' names, their mother's maiden name, and where the parents were born. But if you get the actual photocopy, it will say where they were living, what their occupation, the parents' occupation was, the number of if the child, the number of births, the birth order, whether it's legitimate, all of those, lots of other stuff going on there. The town, the city, the county, all of that. So a lot more stuff there. Obituaries, those often name parents. That's going to be just an affirmation. It's going to be just corroborating what's already on those documents that you have, because again, we said it's secondary information. We don't know who provided it.
I am always sad when they don't list parents, though.
I know.
Wouldn't you just have gone the extra step and said child, daughter of, or son of,
right. Or
even if they're not living,
or just say and 20 grandchildren. You're like, can you not just list the grandkids? I know it's 20, but still.
I need all the names.
I need all the names, right? Or there's a lot of stuff going on in those obituaries, for sure.
That's funny. I just had a thought when you're talking about the obituaries with everybody's name listed.
Right.
We're always thinking about our privacy and, all this stuff is out. People do that. We'll put everybody's name in the obituary, children's names and stuff. And I know a lot of parents don't like that. Probably hence the 20 grandchildren,
right,
or whatever. But those things are out there.
Yep. Probate records. Probates are very important. Don't overlook those. Always go and look for them. Now, not everybody has a probate filed. In the United States, a lot of people do estate, well, not a lot, unfortunately, but there are some people who do estate planning, so they could have had a will but never filed it. But go look for those last wills and testaments, guardianships of minors, next of kin lists, affidavit of heirs. Lots of good information there. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that people will not leave out their children. Again, look for who's not included, look for who's included. Yeah. We know that back, in the 19th century, if a woman was married, it's more like her husband's listed instead of she. So you have to go find that. Like you said, go find that marriage, because if you find that marriage, at least that you can prove that that's her father through the probate then. So, but you may not always prove the maternal relationship, because especially if the father married multiple times, because the women usually died first. Mm-hmm. So that could be a stepmother that's listed as the spouse. But those probates are super important. The census records. We know that, not until 1880 do we have relationships within the family. Mm-hmm. But those aren't always reliable.
I was going to say that they're not always reliable.
Exactly. But those can, again, just help corroborate, or we can see, oh my gosh, this is a discrepancy here. Yeah. Now I need to explain that discrepancy.
I found something interesting, speaking of the census records, when I was researching my family in Wales, going through some of their census, looking for the, multiple names, as we mentioned, Mary Jones and Robert Jones and all the families of Mary and Robert Jones. These people, I'm looking at their dates that they're listed as their birth date, and then their kids, and I'm like, this woman had to be 45 to have this child.
What?
Several cases like that. And I was like, that does not sound right to me. But,
either the fertility lasted a long time, or you need to be right.
What's happening? Right. Or did somebody write the age down wrong, or
did he marry two women by Mary? He married two women, two wives by name of Mary. So which one is it? Yes. Again, things that you need to ask yourself. Don't just take
Is this plausible?
Don't assume and take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Bible records, we need to be looking for those. Again, you're probably going to be more likely to find a transcription unless you can find the family Bible floating around someplace in the family. But the Bible records are good, but they're only really good if there's a publication date and it's contemporary with the information that the events it's recording. So that publication date, the title page with the publication is super important. Make sure you get that.
And then watch the handwriting, as different people might be marking down different times.
Right. And usually if you're trying to track down the family Bible, look for the oldest daughter first, or the oldest son, because the Bibles usually went to the oldest and then kept passing those on down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
SS5s. If you're looking for an ancestor and they died after 1936, the SS5 Social Security applications, those are digitized. You have to ask for them through Social Security Administration. Those are wonderful. There's a downside to it, though. The downside is the individual has to be over 120 years old, or you have to prove that they're dead to get the individual's application. But the reason that we're really trying to most of the time we really want this, because we want to know the names of the parents that are written on it. It's self-reporting. You write your parent back then. You write your parents on it. But if the parents dates of birth are not over 120 years, or you don't have proof that the parents are deceased, then they will redact the parents' names. Ouch. Unless the individual that you're asking about is over 100 years old.
And this started in 1936.
Yes. I know. It's the government, and they have silly rules, in my opinion. Okay. However, but if you can get the SS5s, I would highly recommend doing that. I think they cost $27. You can order them online through Social Security, and it's self-reporting. This individual saying where they were born, the date of birth, who their parents are, and where their parents parents are from, I believe.
Okay.
So, yeah. So it's well worth it.
Good information.
So,
yeah,
yep.
Especially if you can't find it anywhere else. Yeah.
Right. So if all, if all else fails, again, we've got deeds and land records that will also prove kinships. We love those. Cemetery records, grave markers. Sometimes they say child of or spouse of. Those church records, mortality schedules, although those most of the time don't have the parents named on them. Passenger lists. Sometimes they'll say they're going to meet their father or mother or a sibling, or they've left them back in the old country, mother's back in the old country. Divorce records. If you can find divorce records, and people have been divorcing since they've been getting married, minor children are often listed in those, usually the divorce petitions.
Okay.
So that's a good place to start as well. So,
and naturalization papers.
Naturalization papers. Those are wonderful. They will then they'll list all the children and when the children were born.
Yep.
And where they were born,
where they were from, where they came from.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's another good one as well. So we have to be exhaustive. We can't just stop with a birth record if we're lucky enough to have it. But we really need to dig deep and make sure that all of those documents have all the same information. And if not, why? We've had a lot of grandmas who have lied about their age. Their ages either move around or they don't move around at all. They stay the same age for several decades. So,
yeah, or lying about wedding dates. I've got that in my family. So
right, I assumed my grandparents who lived all their entire lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana, got married in Fort Wayne, and then I wrote and I said I want their marriage record, and they said we don't have it.
What?
I know. They drove an hour north and got married in Michigan.
Yeah.
So we make assumptions about these things, and but our ancestors were rather interesting and had their own stories to tell. So we need to.
I'm always amazed at how far people travel to do things too. Like you always think back then, oh, they're not going to go far, but they really do.
Right.
They go far.
Yes.
Moving or just to do something like that.
You had an ancestor that you found out went to Canada.
They went to Canada.
You had,
and then still lied about their marriage date even after.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
So, exhaustive research. Make sure, go back over all your documents. Do you have everything? And does everything match? If it does, then you can move on to the next generation and start all over again.
Yeah.
So,
until next time.
Cheers. Thank you for listening. Please email us with any questions or comments at genealogyhappyhour@gmail.com.
Visit our website, www.genealogyhappyhour.com, for additional resources, books, and wines. Don't forget to drink responsibly.
And never drink around genealogical documents.